Get your hands off me! The woman's voice cracked through the marble hall like glass shattering on stone, firm, clear, but ignored. Two uniformed officers tightened their grip, one on each arm, dragging her heels across the polished courthouse floor. Her navy blazer had slipped off one shoulder, her glasses knocked sideways from the scuffle. The echo of her heels scraped a desperate rhythm against Justice's cold, indifferent tiles. "Ma'am, you are disrupting court order," barked Officer Daniels, tall, red-faced, sweating through his collar. He spoke like a man who'd waited all week to remind someone he had power. Disrupting court order? She had only whispered to her public defender before the judge entered. But in that instant, she had become the perfect target. Calm, confident, and, worst of all, a black woman standing alone in a courtroom full of people who had already decided who she was. "Didn't I tell you people can't keep quiet for 2 minutes?" Daniels sneered. Laughter flickered from the gallery, that cruel, polite kind that hides behind coughs. The second officer, smaller but meaner, twisted her wrist as if proving a point. "Let's make sure you understand what respect means." Respect. That word always changed meaning depending on who was saying it and who was standing on the floor. Her name was Judge Aisha Monroe, but no one in that room seemed to recognize her. Not in her civilian clothes, not without the robe that commanded silence. She had come that morning quietly, not as a sitting judge, but as a sister, attending the misdemeanor hearing of her younger brother, Marcus, who'd been falsely accused of trespassing during a protest. She hadn't announced herself. She wanted to experience what ordinary people experienced in her courtroom, to see firsthand how justice felt when you weren't the one holding the gavel. Now she knew. It felt like humiliation pressed against the floor by boots that smelled of authority and arrogance. "Sir, please," she started again, her tone even, professional. The taller cop shoved her shoulder. "Save it. You people always got something to say." The words burned hotter than the pain in her arm. "You people." Gasps rippled through the spectators. A camera phone lifted. Another. Someone whispered, "Is this being recorded?" Daniels glanced around, nervous for a heartbeat, then doubled down, yanking her toward the exit. "Come on, sweetheart. Outside. You can complain there." Sweetheart. He spat it like a challenge. The bailiff hesitated near the bench, uncertain whether to intervene. The presiding judge, a visiting magistrate from another district, simply looked on, unmoved. He didn't recognize her either. He tapped his pen, impatient. "Remove the disturbance," he ordered. And that was it. Her dignity became collateral damage in a system she'd sworn to protect. Her brother Marcus tried to stand. "That's my sister. You can't—" A gavel struck hard. "Sit down, or you'll be held in contempt." The irony twisted like a knife. Contempt. If only they knew who they were holding in contempt. Aisha felt the blood drain from her face. Years of legal mastery, countless verdicts written, dozens of community programs she had founded, all invisible now because of one assumption. In their eyes, she wasn't a judge. She was just another black woman who didn't know her place. They dragged her into the hallway. Spectators followed, some recording, some pretending not to see. The marble floor stretched like a stage, and today, humiliation had an audience. Daniels pushed her against the wall beside a faded notice board. "You think you can just waltz in here, talk over a judge, and get away with it?" Her eyes lifted slowly to his badge. "Officer Daniels," she said quietly, memorizing the nameplate. He mistook her calm for weakness. "Oh, you can read? Good for you." Laughter from a clerk passing by. Someone muttered, "Another one causing a scene." The security cameras blinked red in the corner, recording every second. The same cameras she had approved funding for 2 years earlier when she sat on the courthouse modernization committee. She could have ended it right there, revealed her ID, her position, her authority. But something inside her said, no. Let it play out. Let the system show its true face. "Am I being detained?" she asked, her voice steady. Daniels frowned. Detained? Lady, you're lucky you're not in cuffs. For what charge? He smirked. We'll figure it out. Marcus's lawyer burst through the doors. What's going on here? Daniels turned. Mind your business. I will not. That woman hasn't broken a single law. Aisha caught the lawyer's panicked glance, the look of someone who'd realized too late who she was. She gave the smallest shake of her head, silently begging him not to expose her yet. Not now. Because this wasn't about saving herself. It was about showing everyone what power looked like when it lost its mask. Daniels radioed something in, mumbling about a disruptive female causing issues. The dispatcher's voice crackled back routine, detached. Copy that. Bring her downstairs for questioning. As they marched her toward the elevators, she caught her reflection in the glass, hair disheveled, lips slightly bleeding where she'd bit down to stay calm. For a brief moment, she saw what the world saw. A woman who looked like she didn't belong here. Then she remembered. She built this place. Every policy that protected the vulnerable, every reform for fair representation, every training session about unconscious bias, she had authored them. And now the very officers who had sat through her workshops were dragging her through the same injustice she fought to eradicate. The elevator doors opened. Reporters from another hearing froze mid-conversation. Cameras turned. Flashes erupted. Daniels cursed under his breath. Great. Just what we need. Press. He shoved her inside. Officer Daniels, she said softly, you're making a mistake you can't take back. He smirked again. Yeah? What are you going to do? Sue me? Her eyes met his. No. I'm going to teach you the law you just broke. The doors slid shut. Somewhere above them, the courtroom buzzed with confusion. Someone had finally recognized her name on the hearing attendance log. Phones were ringing. The presiding judge's clerk was whispering urgently into his ear. A bailiff ran down the hall, pale as paper. But it was already too late. By the time the elevator doors opened again, the entire courthouse was about to learn exactly who they had dragged out and what justice really looked like when it decided to stand up.
The elevator opened with a ding that sounded louder than it should have. Every eye in the lobby turned. Officer Daniels marched out first, still gripping her wrist like a trophy. The second cop trailed behind, muttering something about paperwork and attitude. They were halfway to the security office when it happened. Wait a second! A voice echoed from the upper staircase. A clerk came rushing down the steps, his ID badge spinning wildly as he waved a folder in the air. Daniels ignored him. Keep moving, he told his partner. But the clerk didn't stop running. You can't take her downstairs. Daniels spun around. And who exactly are you? The clerk stammered, out of breath. That's Judge Monroe. Silence. It fell over the marble floor like a thunderclap. Someone dropped a stack of papers. The security guard at the metal detector froze mid-step. Even the hum of the vending machine seemed to pause. Daniels blinked. What did you say? The clerk swallowed hard. Judge Aisha Monroe, 9th Judicial Circuit. She's your supervising magistrate's colleague. The words hit like a hammer. Daniel's hand loosened. The second officer's face drained of color. Aisha straightened her jacket, the calm in her voice cutting through the shock. I believe I asked earlier if I was being detained. No one answered. Even the officer who'd mocked her, you people always got something to say, looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. She adjusted her glasses, dusted off her sleeve, and took one long, slow step forward. The hallway, moments ago filled with laughter and whispers, now sounded like a church after a confession. Her brother Marcus had come running down from the courtroom, panic on his face. When he saw her standing tall again, the relief in his eyes broke her heart. Are you okay? He asked. She nodded softly. I'm fine, but this courthouse isn't. The clerk, still panting, turned toward the officers. "You just laid hands on a sitting judge," he said. His voice shook, not with fear, but disbelief. Daniel stuttered. She didn't identify herself." Aisha's gaze locked on him, steady and sharp. "You didn't ask." The smaller officer spoke up quickly, desperate to defend himself. "She was disrupting court, ma'am, Your Honor. We were just—" "Just what?" she interrupted, her tone suddenly fierce. "Exercising authority or abusing it?" Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Each word landed with the weight of years of silence finally breaking. The reporters who had been snapping photos now stood motionless, cameras forgotten. Somewhere, someone whispered, "Oh my God, she's the one who led the bias training last year." Yes, she was. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very men who had sat through her presentation on implicit bias, the one titled "Seeing Beyond the Badge," were now living proof of how little they had learned. A courthouse administrator approached timidly. "Your Honor, I'm so sorry, we didn't—" "Stop," she said, holding up her hand. "Don't apologize for them. Apologies don't undo assumptions." Her calm was unnerving, regal, controlled. It wasn't rage that made her powerful. It was composure forged from every time she had had to stay calm while someone else lost control. Daniels took a step forward, his voice trembling now. "Judge Monroe, I swear, if I'd known—" She cut him off. "You would have treated me differently." He opened his mouth, closed it again, and in that silence, the truth stood naked between them. Aisha sighed softly, the kind of sigh that carries years of exhaustion. "I wanted to see what justice feels like on the other side of the bench. Now I know." The judge upstairs had come down by then, pale, confused, his robe fluttering as he hurried to her. "Judge Monroe, my sincerest apologies. I had no idea." She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Did you know your officers drag women out of courtrooms for whispering?" He hesitated. "Well, no, I wasn't aware." "Then maybe it's time you start being aware." The hallway stayed silent long after her words faded. Daniel's partner looked like he was ready to collapse. "Ma'am, Your Honor, please, we didn't mean any disrespect." Aisha fixed him with the same calm, measured stare she used on unrepentant defendants. "You didn't mean it," she repeated. "That's the problem. You never mean it." Her brother stood beside her now, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. The guards who had mocked him earlier were now looking at the floor, ashamed. A senior bailiff arrived, whispering urgently to the presiding judge. Aisha caught the word complaint and press. Daniels looked like he'd seen his career flash before his eyes. She glanced toward the camera still rolling in the back. Good. Let them roll. The world needed to see what justice looked like when it turned on itself. Aisha stepped closer to Daniels. "Officer," she said quietly, "you said something to me earlier." He swallowed. I don't recall." "Oh, I think you do." Her voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried across the marble. "You people always got something to say." The crowd shifted, uneasy. She tilted her head. "You were right about one thing, Officer Daniels. I do have something to say." She turned to the nearest camera, her tone now steady and deliberate. "I'm saying it for every woman, every man, every person who's ever been silenced, humiliated, or profiled in a place where justice was supposed to protect them. Today, I was dragged. Tomorrow, it could be anyone. But I won't stay silent. Not anymore." The security office door was still open. that small, dim room that had seen so many terrified faces over the years. Aisha looked at it, then back at Daniels. "Escort me there," she said. "We're going to file a report." A report? "Yes, on misconduct, and I'll be your witness." No one dared move as she walked past, head high, each step echoing like a verdict. In the courtroom above, the hearing had been paused indefinitely, but down here, in the heart of the courthouse, something far bigger was about to begin. Not a hearing, not a trial, but a reckoning. And for the first time in years, the law was about to see itself in the mirror.
Word spread faster than wildfire through the courthouse halls. By the time Judge Aisha Monroe reached the disciplinary wing, the gossip had already made it to every department. "Did you hear? They dragged her out?" "The Judge Monroe? From Civil Rights Court?" "Yeah, in handcuffs, right outside courtroom 3. The whispers buzzed through marble and glass like electricity, the kind that makes you stop breathing for a second. Inside the administrative conference room, the air was thick with panic. 3 senior officers, 1 bailiff, and the presiding judge himself sat around a long mahogany table that suddenly felt like a witness stand. Aisha entered without a word. No robe, no courtroom, just authority radiating from posture alone. The room fell silent. Officer Daniels stood in the corner, eyes down. His once booming voice was gone, replaced by the tremor of a man who just realized how deeply he buried himself. The presiding judge, an older white man named Harold Benton, tried to regain control. "Judge Monroe," he began with a nervous chuckle, "this was a very unfortunate misunderstanding. I assure you our officers—" "Acted exactly as they were trained," Aisha interrupted softly, not looking at him. That shut him up fast. She took a seat, folding her hands neatly on the table. "Tell me, Judge Benton, if I hadn't been wearing this badge of authority, if I had just been Aisha Monroe, ordinary citizen, would this conversation even be happening right now?" Benton adjusted his tie, uncomfortable. "Well, of course it would. We take every complaint." "Really? Then how many women of color have filed complaints this year alone about your officer's conduct in this building?" He didn't answer. The silence was the answer. Her brother Marcus stood by the door, watching her sister reclaim every inch of her dignity. For years he had seen her fight battles for others, people who couldn't afford lawyers, who were silenced by systems. But seeing her have to fight for herself, that cut deeper. Daniels finally spoke, his voice small. "Your Honor, if I may, I didn't realize who you were. I was just trying to maintain order." "Order?" she repeated, her tone cutting through him like glass. "Is that what you call dragging a woman across the floor for asking a question? Or was it the laughter that kept the order, officer?" He opened his mouth and closed it. The younger officer shifted nervously beside him. "Ma'am, he didn't mean anything by it." She turned her gaze on him. "No, he didn't mean anything until now. That's what makes it so dangerous." Judge Benton cleared his throat, desperate to change the subject. "Judge Monroe, we'd like to issue a public apology, of course, and—" "No," she said flatly. Everyone froze. "I don't want a public apology. I want a public lesson, because an apology fades, but accountability, that echoes." The court stenographer who had been quietly typing looked up for the first time, her eyes wide. There was something magnetic about Aisha's calm. It wasn't just anger, it was control, discipline, and a storm that refused to bow. She stood slowly, walking toward the window overlooking the courthouse courtyard. Dozens of people had gathered outside, reporters, protesters, and bystanders holding phones high, waiting to see what would happen next. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, the same face that had once been dismissed, doubted, underestimated. Now that face was the one people were looking up to for justice. She turned around. "Officer Daniels, do you know what irony is?"
He blinked. Ma'am? I wrote the bias training manual you were supposed to study before you got your badge renewed last year. Every scenario, every warning about profiling, it was my work. The air left the room. Daniels looked like someone had punched him. Judge Benton tried to regain composure. Judge Monroe, I think we can all agree this was an unfortunate— No, Harold. She cut him off again, her tone rising for the first time. This was not unfortunate. It was predictable. It was systemic, and it's been happening in your courthouse for years. Her voice cracked with restrained fury. Today, it just happened to the wrong woman. Marcus clenched his jaw, fighting back emotion. He had watched his sister put faith in a system that now stood exposed, hollow, and humiliated. A young intern entered the room suddenly, whispering something to the court administrator. The administrator turned pale and looked at Aisha. Your Honor, the media already has the footage. It's gone viral. Benton nearly jumped out of his chair. What? Who leaked? Aisha held up her hand. Good. He blinked at her. Good? Yes, she said simply. Let people see what happens when a uniform forgets its oath. Maybe then justice will finally have witnesses. The room still went still. The only sound was the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the faint muffled voices of protesters outside chanting her name. Monroe! Justice for Monroe! Daniels looked broken. His partner stared at the table, tears forming in his eyes. Aisha took a deep breath. You both will face internal review, not because I want revenge, but because I want reflection. You'll attend my next training session on judicial bias, and you'll sit in the front row. She picked up her file and headed for the door. But before she left, she paused and looked back. Next time you see a woman like me in your courtroom, remember this day. Remember how it felt to be powerless, even for a moment. Maybe then you'll understand what justice really means. Then she walked out, calm, deliberate, unstoppable. Outside, the crowd erupted. Cameras flashed, protesters cheered, and somewhere deep in the heart of the courthouse, in rooms filled with laws and loopholes, people finally started to listen. Because that day, justice didn't just wear robes. It wore resilience. And her name was Aisha Monroe.
By noon, the video had reached 5 million views. By 3, it was trending in 12 countries. By sunset, it had become a reckoning. The footage opened with chaos, a cell phone recording showing Officer Daniels yanking Aisha Monroe backward by the arm, her bag hitting the marble floor, files scattering like broken wings. Someone in the background laughed. Another voice muttered, "That's what happens when they get loud." But what came next made the internet stop scrolling. The camera panned upward, just long enough to catch the flash of her ID badge as it slid across the floor. The gold emblem, the engraved name, Judge Aisha Monroe, United States Superior Court. The crowd outside gasped when the clip played on the jumbotron screen near the courthouse steps. The irony hit like thunder. The woman they dragged out of court was the court. News anchors scrambled for statements. Headlines erupted across every channel. Civil rights judge assaulted inside her own courtroom. Unbelievable. Black judge mistaken for trespasser by police. Justice for Judge Monroe trends nationwide. By 6 p.m., the courthouse steps had transformed into a sea of signs and voices. Equal justice now. She is the law. Your honor deserves honor. Aisha watched from her office window, still shaken but standing tall. Her assistant, Carla, burst into the room, out of breath. "Judge, CNN wants you live in 15. MSNBC just called too. They're saying the footage is—" "I know," Aisha said quietly. "I saw it." She looked at her reflection in the glass again, the same reflection she'd seen earlier that morning. But something was different now. The fear that had crept into her bones hours ago was gone. In its place was fire. She turned to Carla. "Call the press.
I'll speak outside in 10 minutes. The courthouse entrance was surrounded by hundreds of people, protesters, reporters, families, and cameras. So many cameras they looked like a wall of blinking eyes. When the doors opened, the crowd hushed. Every voice, every whisper, every click of a phone stopped. Judge Aisha Monroe stepped onto the courthouse steps. No robe, no gavel, no podium. Just a woman standing in the center of a storm she hadn't started, but now owned completely. She raised a single hand. I was dragged out of this courthouse today, not because I broke the law, but because someone refused to see that I am the law. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The uniform I faced didn't ask for my name, he didn't ask for my badge. He saw my skin before he saw my service, my gender before my title, my face before my humanity. A low murmur of agreement rolled through the onlookers. Phones were raised. Tears glistened. She continued, "This building stands for justice, yet today it became a mirror, and that mirror showed us exactly what's still broken." Reporters leaned forward. This wasn't a statement. This was a moment in history. She looked directly into the nearest camera lens, into the eyes of millions watching from living rooms, buses, break rooms across America. To every person who has ever been silenced, profiled, or dismissed in a place that's supposed to protect you, this fight isn't just mine, it's ours. The crowd erupted, but Aisha wasn't done. Her voice grew stronger, sharper, cutting through the noise. "And to every officer watching, this is your moment too. Not to feel attacked, but to look inward, because the law means nothing if it only protects those who look like it was written for them." Thunderous applause. People chanted her name. Reporters called it the speech that redefined justice in America. And right there, in front of flashing cameras and tearful strangers, Officer Daniels emerged from the side entrance, escorted by Internal Affairs. His face was pale, his hands cuffed in front of him. The crowd gasped again, some shouting in disbelief, others in relief. Aisha turned, their eyes meeting briefly. She didn't gloat, she didn't smirk. She simply nodded, the kind of nod that says, "Learn, don't forget." The media caught that moment, the look of calm defiance, the image of power with grace, and it became iconic. By nightfall, her speech had been replayed in full across every major network. Clips flooded social media, celebrities reposted her words. The hashtag, "Your honor deserves honor," topped every trending list. But behind all the chaos, in the quiet of her office later that evening, Aisha sat alone with her thoughts. Justice wasn't a viral clip to her. It was a promise, one she'd sworn to keep, even when the system itself broke that promise first. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mentor, retired Judge Evelyn Ross. "You turned humiliation into history, but remember, they'll come for you harder now. Be ready." Aisha looked out the window at the sea of supporters still chanting her name under the courthouse lights. "Let them come," she whispered. "I've been ready my whole life." And somewhere between the flashing cameras and the chanting crowd, the system she had dedicated her life to began to tremble. Because this time, justice had a face, a voice, and a name America would never forget. By dawn the next morning, every major network had one name on repeat: Judge Aisha Monroe. CNN aired the footage frame by frame. The moment Officer Daniels grabbed her arm, the glint of her fallen badge, the collective gasp from bystanders when someone shouted, "She's a judge!" Fox called it a misunderstanding. MSNBC called it a reflection of systemic bias. And Twitter called it the moment America saw its justice system without the robe. Every outlet ran side-by-side photos, Daniels in uniform, face twisted with arrogance, and Aisha standing tall on the courthouse steps like a statue of resilience. The comment sections exploded. How can a judge not be safe inside her own courtroom?
If that's what they do to her, what chance do the rest of us have? She didn't just represent the law, she represented all of us who never get to speak. Overnight, Aisha Monroe became a symbol, not just of justice, but of the fragility of it. What began as humiliation had transformed into a mirror reflecting centuries of inequality back at the system that caused it. That morning, Aisha's office was chaos. The phones wouldn't stop ringing. Some calls were from news stations, others from legal organizations, and a few from people she'd never expected to hear from. The governor's office, the Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, and even the president's communications secretary. Carla nearly tripped over cords from the media equipment crowding the hallway. "Judge, CNN is requesting a live interview at 10. The governor's office says they'll release a statement at noon. Oh, and the FBI's Civil Rights Division wants to meet with you immediately." Aisha took a long breath. "Tell them I'll cooperate fully, but I'll speak my truth on my own terms." Carla hesitated. "Judge, they're saying Officer Daniels might press charges, claims he didn't know who you were." Aisha froze. The hypocrisy hit her like a punch. "He didn't need to know who I was. He just needed to know what respect was." Meanwhile, at the police department across town, Daniel sat in a conference room under investigation. His lawyer whispered frantically, but he couldn't focus. The clip of him yelling, "Get your hands off that file, lady!" was playing on every TV in the building, and every officer passing by the glass wall avoided eye contact. "What happens now?" he asked finally. His lawyer sighed. "Internal affairs, public outrage, possible suspension, maybe termination. Depends how much she pushes." "She can't ruin my career over one mistake," he snapped. His lawyer stared at him. "You didn't just grab a woman, Daniels. You grabbed a federal judge. You put the entire department on trial." Back at the courthouse, hundreds gathered again, waiting for Aisha's statement. This time, the crowd wasn't just activists or locals. There were lawyers, politicians, clergy members, even off-duty police officers standing silently, some holding signs that read, "Justice starts with us." When Aisha stepped out, the flash of cameras was blinding, but she didn't flinch. She had spent her life delivering verdicts for others. Now, she was ready to deliver one for herself. I've spent years watching defendants explain why they acted out of fear. But yesterday, I became the defendant. Yesterday, I met fear in uniform. A deep hush fell. Let me be clear, this isn't just about one officer. It's about every person who's been judged before being heard. It's about every assumption that strips away dignity before identity. She paused, eyes sharp, voice trembling slightly with conviction. When justice becomes blind and deaf, it stops being justice. It becomes control. The crowd erupted in applause so loud the courthouse doors shook. But even amid the cheers, Aisha noticed something: the quiet tears on the faces of officers standing near the back. She stepped closer to the mic. "I don't want revenge," she said softly. "I want reform. Not because I was hurt, but because I survived to make sure it doesn't happen again." Her words hit like lightning, not just emotional, but moral, cutting straight through politics and pride. That line replayed everywhere within hours. Not because I was hurt, but because I survived. By evening, over 20 million people had watched her speech. Clips were on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, every platform imaginable. Late-night hosts quoted her. Civil rights lawyers called her the Rosa Parks of the courtroom. But while America debated her, Aisha prepared for what came next. In a private meeting later that night, the Chief Justice spoke gravely. "You realize, Judge Monroe, this investigation could expose more than just misconduct. It could shake the very foundation of this court." Aisha didn't hesitate. Then maybe it's time it shook. That night, alone in her office, she opened the folder that started it all, the very case she had been about to rule on before being dragged out. a civil rights appeal involving a black teenager wrongfully accused of resisting arrest. The irony cut deep. The same kind of case she'd always fought to handle fairly was exactly what her own life had just become. She stared at the boy's file for a long moment, then whispered, "Not anymore. Not like this." Her pen moved with resolute, drafting a judicial motion that would change everything. Aisha wasn't just going to fight her personal battle, she was going to turn her humiliation into legislation. Because this time, the law wouldn't silence her. It would speak through her.
The hearing was set for Monday morning. By dawn, the courthouse looked like a fortress. Reporters lined the marble steps, cameras on tripods, microphones raised like spears. Helicopters hovered overhead. Streets were closed. Every TV network had cleared its schedule. It wasn't just a disciplinary hearing. It was a reckoning. Inside, the courtroom felt different this time, not because of its walls, but because of who filled them. Federal investigators, civil rights attorneys, state officials, and the same police department that once ignored her. Aisha entered quietly, wearing a charcoal suit. No robe, no symbols of power, just her. Still, every head turned. The crowd stood. Even the judge presiding over the hearing paused, acknowledging the irony. A judge now sitting in the witness seat. At the front, Officer Daniels sat with his legal counsel, face pale, eyes down. He hadn't smiled since the day of the incident, and now the world would see why. Judge Monroe, the lead investigator, began, "Please describe what happened on the day of the incident." Her voice was calm. It began with a question. The courtroom waited. She looked straight ahead. He asked me, "Who do you think you are?" Her words echoed across the chamber, landing heavy. I answered him, but not with my title. I answered him with restraint, because I've spent my life teaching others that justice is not what you say when you have power. It's what you do when you have none. Gasps, cameras clicked like gunfire. Daniel's lawyer objected, but the presiding judge raised a hand. Let her speak. Aisha continued. When he dragged me, I felt his assumption before his grip. He didn't see a judge. He didn't even see a woman. He saw someone his mind had already convicted, someone who looked like she didn't belong in a courtroom unless she was sitting at the defense table. The silence was electric. She turned toward Daniels. "You asked me for identification, but tell me, officer, what identification could I have shown you that would make me human to you?" Daniel's lips trembled. He didn't answer. Aisha didn't blink. That's the danger of unchecked power. It doesn't just break rules, it breaks perspective. Outside, the clip went viral instantly. People watching from their phones, classrooms, offices, the country froze to listen. Hashtag #LetHerSpeak began trending within minutes. Inside the room, she pulled out a document from her folder, the same one she'd written the night of the incident. "This," she said, holding it up, "is a motion I'm filing today, the Monroe Accountability Act. It will require body cameras in all courthouse security operations and mandatory bias training for every officer assigned to a judicial facility, effective immediately upon approval." Her words landed like a gavel strike. No one had expected her to come prepared with legislation. The presiding judge leaned forward. "Are you certain you wish to pursue this formally?" She nodded. "I'm not here to punish. I'm here to prevent." The next woman dragged out of a courtroom might not have a camera watching her. Daniel's lawyer whispered something, but the officer suddenly stood, trembling. "Judge Monroe," he said quietly, "I was wrong." A murmur rippled through the room. He swallowed hard. I didn't see you. I saw what I was trained to suspect." Aisha's expression softened just slightly. "I know. That's why it has to change." And just like that, the story shifted. It wasn't about shame anymore. It was about awakening. Even Daniel's commanding officer, sitting in the back row, wiped his eyes.
The presiding judge rose. This court finds that Judge Monroe acted within her rights and showed extraordinary restraint under provocation. Officer Daniels' conduct is hereby subject to full disciplinary review. Additionally, this court supports the submission of the Monroe Accountability Act for legislative review. Applause erupted. For the first time in the courthouse's long history, people weren't clapping for a verdict. They were clapping for truth. When Aisha stepped out onto the courthouse steps again, the sun broke through the clouds. Reporters surged forward shouting questions, but she only said one sentence before walking away. Justice doesn't end when the gavel drops. That's where it begins. Within hours, that line was everywhere, printed on signs, shared in speeches, turned into TikTok edits, even etched on courthouse walls by activists. Aisha Monroe had gone from being silenced to being the voice the system could no longer ignore.
The day after the hearing, America woke up to one name on every channel: Judge Aisha Monroe. Her face dominated every newsfeed: CNN, MSNBC, even conservative outlets that had mocked her days earlier. Clips of her speech played on loop. "What identification could I have shown that would make me human to you?" In coffee shops, airports, and classrooms, people repeated those words like scripture. But with recognition came resistance. By noon, government inboxes were flooded. Civil rights groups demanded the Monroe Accountability Act be passed immediately. Police unions called it an insult to law enforcement. And behind the scenes, certain senators whispered about putting her in her place. 3 days later, she walked into Washington, D.C.'s Capitol building for the first public hearing on her proposal. The marble corridors stretched like cathedrals of power, long, cold, and intimidating. But Aisha didn't flinch. She wore the same charcoal suit, the same calm expression. Inside the Senate chamber, every seat was filled. Journalists lined the walls. Protesters stood outside with banners reading, "Justice needs her. Accountability has a new name." The lead senator cleared his throat. "Judge Monroe, thank you for your statement. But some might say your proposal paints all officers as biased. Would you like to clarify your intent?" Aisha met his gaze. "I'm not painting anyone. I'm holding up a mirror. If some don't like the reflection, maybe it's time to change what they see." The room stirred. Reporters typed furiously. Even the senator couldn't hide a smirk of respect. Another senator, older and condescending, leaned into his mic. "Judge Monroe, you're proposing mandatory training and federal oversight. That's expensive, unrealistic, and frankly, many believe you are only doing this out of personal vengeance." The room tensed. Cameras zoomed in. Aisha's tone stayed even, the kind of calm that can silence chaos. "Senator, vengeance is loud. Justice is quiet. What happened to me wasn't an isolated mistake. It was a pattern, one we've ignored for decades because it doesn't happen to the right people in the right rooms. Well, it finally did, and I'm here to make sure it never does again." The senator opened his mouth to respond, but applause erupted from the back. Security tried to restore order, but the wave of clapping spread until the entire gallery stood. That night, her testimony went viral again, this time global. In London, Paris, and Johannesburg, activists quoted her words. Talk shows dubbed her America's conscience in a suit. A major newspaper headline read, "She spoke once, and the system trembled." But fame came with fire. Her office received threats, her car was vandalized. A smear campaign began online. Fake judge, media puppet, race baiter in a robe. Still, she showed up every day, to court, to meetings, to community centers where she listened to people who'd been silenced like she once was. One evening she sat alone in her chambers, scrolling through hundreds of messages, hate and hope mixed in the same inbox. Then she found one that stopped her cold. It was from Officer Daniels. "Judge Monroe, I resign today. I want you to know your law changed me. I used to think authority meant control. Now I understand it means accountability. Thank you for showing me what real justice looks like." Aisha exhaled slowly.
For the first time in months, she smiled. Not a public smile, a human one. A week later, the Monroe Accountability Act passed its first major hurdle. The Judiciary Committee voted 9-2. Cheers erupted across the chamber. When the results came in, Aisha's phone exploded with messages. "You did it! History, Judge! America's finally listening!" But she wasn't celebrating. She knew better. Passing a law was never the end. It was just the first promise. And promises meant responsibility. That night, Aisha appeared on live TV, her first national interview. The host, a sharp-tongued political commentator, leaned forward. "Judge Monroe, the country's divided. You've become both a hero and a target. What keeps you going?" Aisha looked straight into the camera. "My grandmother once told me, 'Child, if your truth shakes the room, don't quiet down, build a new one.' That's what this law is, a new room, one where no one's dragged out because they don't look like they belong." The studio went silent. Even the host paused, then said softly, "Judge, thank you." The clip hit 20 million views overnight. Outside the courthouse where it all began, someone had left a single card at the steps. It read, "For every woman who was told to stay silent, you made noise for all of us." Aisha picked it up on her way home, tucked it into her briefcase, and whispered, "Then let's make it louder."
6 months later, Washington, D.C. woke to rain. Heavy, cleansing rain that rolled down marble steps and made the Capitol's white dome gleam like it had been reborn. Inside, history was about to be written. The Monroe Accountability Act, the bill sparked by one act of injustice, was up for its final vote. Across the country, people watched live. Churches, schools, barbershops, and diners had the same screen on. Even the courthouse where Aisha had once been dragged out replayed her speech from that day. Aisha sat quietly in the Senate gallery, hands clasped. No robe, no gavel, just her, the woman who had turned humiliation into law. One by one, senators cast their votes. I. Her breath caught. It was close. Too close. Then came the final voice. A senator from her home state, who had opposed her from the start, adjusted his mic. "I voted no 6 months ago. But today, I vote aye, because justice should never depend on who's wearing the uniform." The room erupted. Applause thundered through the chamber. Reporters scrambled to get the shot. Aisha Monroe standing with tears streaming down her face as the bill officially passed. Across America, people cheered. In schools, students hugged teachers. In precincts, good cops nodded quietly. And in homes where injustice had lived for generations, mothers whispered, "Finally." That night, Aisha stood on the steps of the Capitol, surrounded by candlelight. Thousands had gathered in the rain, strangers holding signs that said, "Accountability won." Her law, our voice. A journalist pushed forward. "Judge Monroe, what does this moment mean to you?" Aisha took the microphone, rain streaking her face like silver. "This moment isn't mine. It belongs to every person who's been handcuffed for being misunderstood. Every child who watched their parent be silenced. Every officer who chose integrity over arrogance. Every soul who ever wondered if the system would see them as human." She paused, letting the crowd breathe her words. Then she looked up at the night sky. Justice isn't perfect, but tonight it listened. The crowd erupted in applause. Some wept, others raised candles, others just stood there, feeling something they hadn't in years: hope. Weeks later, Aisha received an invitation to the White House. The president himself wanted to thank her for restoring faith in American justice. But what mattered most to her wasn't the ceremony.
It was the handwritten note that came with it. "My son is alive because of your law." The officer stopped, thought, and chose compassion. "Thank you for giving him that choice." A mother in Georgia. Aisha read it 3 times before pressing it to her heart. That night she didn't celebrate in luxury or politics. She visited the same courthouse steps where it all began. The floor was still cracked where she'd fallen. She traced it with her hand, not in anger, but in peace. A young girl walking with her father stopped, recognizing her. "Are you the judge who changed the law?" the girl asked shyly. Aisha smiled. "No, sweetheart. I'm just the woman who reminded them what fairness looks like." Months later, a nationwide campaign began, the Monroe Project. Every courthouse now hosted open listening sessions between police, lawyers, and citizens. Training programs spread across departments, and for the first time in history, public accountability boards had the power to suspend officers who broke the oath. But the most profound change wasn't in legislation, it was in hearts. Officers wrote her letters saying, "Your law made me a better cop." Teens sent videos of themselves studying law, inspired by her. And one viral clip showed a little black girl giving a school presentation titled, "When They Dragged Her Out, She Stood Up for All of Us." 6 months later, Aisha delivered a televised address, her final public statement before stepping down from the bench. She stood behind a podium, calm and steady as ever.
The same voice that once trembled in humiliation now carried the weight of a nation. "If my story taught you anything," she began, "let it be this. Power means nothing without perspective. Uniforms don't define justice, actions do. And silence," she paused, eyes glistening, "is just another form of permission." She leaned closer to the microphone, her tone both fierce and tender. "Tomorrow, when you see someone being dismissed, don't look away. When you hear someone say they deserved it, ask why they believe that. And when you see wrong done in your name, stop it. Because justice isn't a department, it's a decision." The audience rose to their feet, applause echoing through the hall. Her closing words were quiet, yet they shook the country. "They once called me a criminal, but 10 agents and the truth called me your honor. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure every person gets to be addressed with the respect they deserve." The camera panned out slowly as the crowd roared. People at home stood up, some crying, others saluting the screen. A nation that had once doubted her now called her something sacred, America's judge.